Hello, my name is Matthew, and I started reading Crime and Punishment today by Dostoevsky, and I already finished part one. This novel is terrific straight away. Just from the beginning, it just starts so strong. It sucks you in, predominantly because of the strength of the strange main character, Raskolnikov. We meet him right at the beginning. He's visiting a pawn shop, and very much like the narrator from Notes from Underground, there's a lot of similarities between the two characters, some differences, but being poor, embittered, having a sense of pride and superiority, deeply unhappy with the circumstances that they are in. Raskolnikov has found himself in. He's a failed student. He's living in St. Petersburg, living in squalor, wears ratty, worn down, ripped up clothes, has a bowler hat with no brim. The brim has been worn away, so while he's out on the street, someone makes fun of him and shouts across the street about his hat, and he's mortified by this, feels shamefaced, and has one of those philosophical ideas that it's not so bad to be poor and worn down, wearing tattered, ratty clothes, but to have an article of clothing that's noticeable, a strange hat. He talks about how he has to get rid of this bowler with no brim. But we meet him visiting a pawn shop of sorts. It's a woman that runs a little, I suppose, a consignment out of her tenant, or out of her apartment. He's in there. He's trying to pawn off this worthless timepiece. She's offering him just pennies, kopecks, and he's doing his best to negotiate, but he's getting nothing, and he leaves demoralized. And throughout part one, we have so many of these really strange, dreamlike sequences. They feel fantastical and unlikely and psychologically intense and exhausting. He goes into a bar. He's just walking down the street and decides he's just going to go into this bar, have a glass of beer, and he gets accosted by this drunken man who has a very ornate, elaborate way of speaking, as if his drunkenness puffs up his language, and he calls out to Raskolnikov, who's quite unhappy about this situation, and the guy is telling him the story of his life, and it's just so depressing. The guy's story goes on and on. Raskolnikov just wants to get out of there. He's not keeping good company. Even the barkeeper is pointing out that this drunken man is a scoundrel. We learn about his home life, just a wife that's miserable, children that are just crying and starving, and he's at the bar and can hardly walk. Raskolnikov walks this stumbling man home and goes up into the apartment, and it's a shared apartment with passageways where tenants are going in and out of people's homes. He goes into this miserable room. Children are just crying on the floor, not sleeping on beds. There's a child just kind of squatted up against a sofa. And we find out that this drunken man, had taken the last bit of his money and spent it on drink the wife is screaming, pulling out the drunken man's hair, is going, "You miserable wretch." And everyone sort of like looks up at Raskolnikov. "What are you doing here?" And as if he's like this accomplice, and Raskolnikov's like, I gotta get out of this place. And even though he's poor, throughout part one, there are these moments of generosity, regretful generosity, but he puts some money on a windowsill or just on a flat surface, leaves unnoticed. It's another just strange sequence of walking down the street and encountering this drunken, swaying girl, a young girl, 16, 15. Her clothes have been put on by somebody else. She's stumbling, collapses onto a park bench. Raskolnikov sees this and notices another man across the street, a dandy, an older gentleman, wearing very nice clothes, but paying close attention to this drunken girl. He accosts the man, he's shaking him as if he had nefarious ideas of what to do with this drunken girl. A police officer shows up, breaks him up. We have sympathy from Raskolnikov, but he gets sick and tired of the whole thing and kind of says, well, just let her go. He ends up giving her some money as well. We spend time in his apartment dwelling, just as squalid as any of the other dwellings that we've been in the book. The pawn shop, the drunken man's apartment, everywhere you go, the poverty and the description of the impoverishment is depressing. There are a lot of really depressing, deeply sad moments in this book. He has to sneak around. The landlord wants their money. He hasn't, Raskolnikov hasn't paid him and paid his rent in months, and part of the rental agreement is having a part-time servant that brings up food to him. We get to meet her. She brings some tea. She calls him a lazy bum and things like that. But she delivers a letter from Raskolnikov's mother. A small point of hope in part one, where we hear about Raskolnikov's family background, the generosity and sacrifice that the mother and father, the family of Raskolnikov, put themselves through to send Raskolnikov to St. Petersburg to be in school and to make a life for himself. And he's failing at this. He is just an idler, a dilettante, someone that just thinks that he's a crackpot, mentally unbalanced, but he just sees himself as this great thinker. And that same idea in the narrator from Notes from Underground, that if he could just sort of present his theories, if he could be noticed, something would happen. But his sister is going, the mother has announced that the sister is going to be married, and there's this man that actually spends time in St. Petersburg, and it could be an opportunity for the whole family. It's somebody that's successful, maybe not book smart, maybe not as aristocratic, but hardworking, determined, wants to marry this girl. We don't know very much about all the motives, but it does seem fairly harmless. Of course, Raskolnikov scoffs at the idea, and he's insulted that he wouldn't have had the opportunity to offer his approval of this marriage. The mother is saying there's potential for a professional relationship. This man that's going to marry his sister works in law, and Raskolnikov at some point studied law. Raskolnikov says he wants to break the whole thing up, and it's an insult, and it's never going to happen. And he's not eating, he's hardly drinking anything other than alcohol, just consumed in his own thoughts, and is just in a state of mania and delirium. He goes off into the streets. He has horrible dreams that there is just this dreadful dream sequence. It's grotesque. It's just a pitiful, horrific situation of an old horse being forced to pull a carriage that it's not strong enough to carry, and the owner of the horse is whipping the poor thing and screaming out insults and offering to have people get into the carriage to weigh it down even more. People are laughing. It's a crowd of drunkards torturing and beating, eventually beating this horse with whips and wooden boards and iron rods, while the poor horse is struggling and being beaten to death by a laughing, drunken crowd. All of this being witnessed in this dream by a young Raskolnikov as a young boy. Just these... I wanted the scene to be over because it was so visceral and uncomfortable to read. Just the torture of this poor animal that deserves not that kind of situation. It's just awful. There's other dreamlike sequences, just unlikely events that pop up. He learns that the woman that runs the pawn shop, through this exchange, he's hearing officers and people talking. The woman that runs the pawn shop has a sister that lives in this apartment, and he finds out that the next day she will not be in the apartment at 7 o'clock. And we learn, if you've never read the book before, you learn the first time at the very beginning of the book when he was in that apartment hawking off that little timepiece, he wasn't just in there to maybe sell that little thing and get a little bit of money. He was also casing the joint, because he had this just insane idea, and there's all of this moralizing and ethical dance arounds, but he has this idea of murdering her. She's this wretched woman, terrible to her sister. She has all of this money. Nobody likes her. She's no good to society. And he would do much better if he had all of this money. Just like the idea of him being noticed. He would be able to save humanity, hundreds, thousands of people, if only this one poor, wretched woman was dead. And you read this and think, like, why? What on earth are you thinking? And he's obsessed with this. And had been plotting. He is so self-satisfied. He had this idea of putting a loop underneath, inside his jacket, his overcoat, in which to hang an axe disguised, so no one would know that he's carrying an axe. He believes that wielding an axe is the proper way for him to start murdering people. But he has this plan, and there's a feeling of excitement strongly mixed with this feeling of dread. Like, this is the guy we're following. This is what he's thinking about doing. He puts on his little loop, and it's almost like this clock starts ticking down, the stopwatch, or hour by hour, minute by minute. Now we're almost in this real time mode of storytelling where he needs to get out of his own apartment, not be caught by the landlord or the assistant. He doesn't want any witnesses. No one should know that he's leaving the apartment. He has a close call. The assistant, or the servant, is working in the closet where he thought he was going to be getting the axe. In a moment of luck, he finds, I believe, another axe in another room under a pile of logs. He puts it in this prized loop of his. He's going down the street. Streets feel abandoned. Gets to the apartment building. By a stroke of luck, there's a truck going by. He gets into the apartment unnoticed. All of the halls are empty. It looks like several of the apartments are vacant. And he gets up to the door. He's buzzing the door. It's 7 o'clock at night. This woman is there. She's home. He can tell she's on the other side of the door, pressing her ear up against the door and going, "What do you want?" And the door opens. He pushes himself in and starts talking about how he has this silver cigarette case that he wants to sell her. The woman's even saying, "Who are you?" And he's going, "You know who I am." And they go back and forth. She finally loses some of that suspicion, and she's looking at this wrapped up thing, and she's going, "Confound it! Who wrapped this thing up? I can't even get into it." And he loosens that loop. He gets the axe in his hand, and with the blunt end of the axe, he hammers down on the crown of her head, and then offers successive blows onto the body of this old woman. There's blood pouring out of her, and he's committed the deed. He's now a murderer. He thinks so many of these criminals that he reads about always make mistakes at the moment of the crime. It's because they're not keeping their temperament at the moment that it's most vital that they do. And as soon as he does this, he falls apart. He just falls to pieces. He's already just a mess. He ends up getting her keys. He gets this purse off of her neck. He's now covered in blood, and the axe is covered in blood. He goes into the bedroom. He's shaking and trying to fumble with these keys. He hardly can get anything unlocked. And while he's in there, he's wiping his hands with red silk, thinking that it's more of a disguise. So he's just totally out of his mind, not thinking clearly. And he hears someone in the other room, and then silence, and then maybe a little squeak, and he's silent. And finally he goes off, and it's the sister that had come home, just frozen in fear, looking down on the ground. He picks up his axe, and with the edge side, slashes into her face. Now he's committed a double murder. And he's not looting, he's not stealing anything at this point, but he's staying in the apartment, going from room to room. He's washing his hands, he's washing the axe, he's cleaning up, And at some moment, it occurs to him, like, what are you still doing here? And he looks at the front door and realizes this whole time the door has been ajar. The reason the sister was able to walk in is that he didn't have the presence of mind to lock the door from the inside, either as soon as he came in or at least after he finished murdering the first person. So now he has to collect himself and escape. And it gets so tense and frightening. For some reason, you're reading it, you want him to escape, I suppose. But for as easy as it was for him to get in, and for as abandoned as everything felt, all of a sudden the apartment complex is feeling populated, and there's a claustrophobia. He gets down the hallway when he hears someone coming in the other direction, runs back to the crime scene, locks himself in. The person coming down the hall is buzzing on that door, rattling the door. And now he's trapped. He feels the bolts and latches rattling on the door and believes with enough force this person can just rip the door out of the frame. He doesn't want to push on the door. Then the other person knows that someone's in there. Someone else shows up. They're looking for the pawn dealer, the woman that's running the pawn shop. And the person makes an observation. The door is locked from the inside. So somebody's in there. He gets suspicious. Something is afoot. And the two of them talk and say, you stay here. I'm going to go downstairs and make a phone call. And now he's really trapped in here. They didn't just leave. Now they have a plan to keep someone at the door. Thankfully for Raskolnikov, the person that's supposed to be on guard becomes impatient and wanders down to see what the other person is doing. And Raskolnikov escapes down the hallway. And there's already this cat and mouse game where they're running up and down corridors and stairways. And at the very last moment, Raskolnikov, right at the moment of being caught by these two figures, hides in an apartment that was open and vacant, and he gets away. He gets out of the building. He's just shaken. He's committed. He's a murderer. And it didn't go as planned. He thought it was perfectly all right to kill the one woman, but the sister, she had no reason to die. The other one really didn't either, but we're following along with the story. And he gets into the apartment, he puts the axe back, he goes up into his room, and he's just in a trance. What have I done? It's the end of part one. It's just psychologically explosive, and this story is so tense and engaging. We just had this one character that we're following along, and there's a real story, there's activity, there's stuff happening, there's surprises. It's just character that is really fun to be around, but he's dangerous and demented and a crackpot and generally awful. It's depressing but exhilarating. So part one now so far has just it's been such a good day of reading. So excited to keep going. So those are my thoughts and a lot of summarizing of part one of Crime and Punishment. I'm reading the Michael Katz translation. If you're reading along, or if you've already read it, please let me know your thoughts on the book or anything that I had to say. So please leave a comment if you would like. And thank you for watching, and take care.